Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is the next video in the FastAPI tutorial series. And in this video, we will learn about authentication. So far, we have learned how to fetch data from MongoDB using FastAPI by utilizing path and query parameters. And also we learned how to insert data into MongoDB through FastAPI using request body. However, all the endpoints that we have created so far are all open endpoints. There is no authentication mechanism to ensure that only authenticated users get access to these endpoints. So in this video, we will learn how to implement an authentication mechanism using username and password. So the first step is basically to create users at the backend. Let's do that first. So we are back in the editor and I'll go to the models.py and add a user model which would contain a username, which is going to be a string field, as well as a password field that is going to be a string field as well. Okay, so we have created the MongoDB user model. Next, I'll go to the main.py file, and here I'll create a new endpoint that will sort of act like a sign up endpoint. Okay, so using this endpoint, people would be able to sign up and provide their username and password. Let's say app.post. This is going to be a post, and this will act like sign up. I'll have a function called sign up, and finally it will return something like a message which would say new user created successfully. Now, like we did in the previous example, we have to create a Pydantic model for this user because we are going to use request body that will inherit from base model of Pydantic. And this will contain two fields, basically username, which is going to be a string, and password, which is again going to be a string as well. Now I can mention this new user to be the request body, and then I can create an instance of the user class. So I'll say user equals user. Now this is of the MongoDB model. So this is user, and we'll say username equals new user dot username, and password is new user dot password. Then I'll save this user dot save. Okay, let's run the program. Let's open the browser, go to the documentation. I have a new endpoint here for sign up, try it out, and I have a request body with username and password. So as a demo, I'll just say user1, that's the first user, and the password I'll give a really bad password, so it's going to be user1@123. Okay, let's execute. We have an internal server error. Why? Name user is not defined, so we have to import user from models, right? So the user that we have created, we did not import that. So let's go back, execute it once more, and we have new user created successfully, right? Now let's go back to MongoDB Compass, and I am here in the user document. So a new user document has been, sorry, a new user collection has been created. If I refresh this, I get the first user. So it is user1 and password is user1@123. But as you can guess, storing password in clear text is not recommended. So we need to hash this password. To do that, we have a library called pathlib that is also recommended in the FastAPI documentation. So let's install passlib, and the hashing algorithm that we'll be using is going to be bcrypt. So we'll install passlib with bcrypt. So let's do that. Okay, so passlib has been installed. Now we can utilize passlib. I'll import. So we have to basically do some initial configuration to ensure that we can hash a particular password. So we'll say from passlib dot context import crypt context, and I'll create a new context called password context. It's going to be crypt context. I'll pass certain parameters. First one is the hashing algorithm that we'll be using. So that's provided using schemes equals bcrypt, and also mention deprecated equals auto. Oh, I forgot, this should be within a list. So we may be able to use multiple hashing algorithms. So this can be within a list. This should be within a list. Okay. Now I will create a new function called get password hash that will take the password as the parameter and return the password hash. So we'll say password context dot hash the password. So this will return the hash of the password. Now this function is what we will utilize in our sign up function. So here we'll say, instead of storing new user dot password in plain text, I would say get password hash and then pass this password as the parameter. Okay, so now let's run the program again. Let's go back to the documentation, and I'll make it user2 and user2 at the rate 123. Let's execute. New user is created successfully. Let's go back to MongoDB Compass, refresh. Now I can see the password is in a hashed format. I'll not be able to make out what the password is. So that way we have implemented hashing for the password. Now that we already have a valid user, we will now learn the flow of the authentication when a client provides this username and password to FastAPI. Okay, so we have the client and we have the FastAPI backend. When a client accesses the FastAPI backend for the first time, the client would be required to provide a username and password. FastAPI will validate whether the username and password is correct, and if correct, FastAPI will provide a token which is valid for some time back to the client. The client then stores this token in the front end, and for all the subsequent requests uses the token to get itself authenticated. The client would not be required to enter the username and password for all the subsequent requests till the time the token is valid. FastAPI authenticates the client using this token, and if valid, FastAPI would return the data. This is true for all the subsequent requests till the time the token is valid. Let's say the token is valid for 30 minutes. After the initial authentication, the client would not need to be authenticated using username and password for the next 30 minutes. Once the token becomes invalid, the client would need to re-authenticate itself by providing the username and password. Again, FastAPI will authenticate whether the username and password is correct, and if correct, will provide a new token which is valid for the next 30 minutes. And this process would go on. That's the basic authentication flow when using username and password. Let's understand this more in detail by implementing this mechanism. Now we will be using the OAuth2 mechanism to implement this username and password authentication, and FastAPI provides an inbuilt class called OAuth2 password bearer for this purpose. So let's import that first. Okay, now using this class, we can basically tell the client to go to a particular URL to provide the username and password and get the token back. Okay, so we have to create an instance and we have to pass a parameter called token URL is equal to token. So this is the URL to where the client should go to provide the username and password and get the token. So by mentioning here, the client wouldn't know what to do. So we have to add this to an endpoint. So let's take the first endpoint that we created here. Yeah, let's reuse that. I'll just comment this out. Yeah. So here we have to mention token as a string depends on this scheme. Okay, where does this depends come from? Well, we have to import from FastAPI. This basically is for dependencies. So what essentially this line would do is whenever a client comes to this endpoint, the endpoint will ask, do you have a token? If the client says, yes, I do, the endpoint would validate the token. And if it is valid, it will get access to that particular endpoint. If not, if the client says, no, I don't have a token, it instructs the client to go to this URL called token and provide the username and password, get the token, and come back here and provide it to the API endpoint. Now we haven't created this token URL, so let's go ahead and create that. So we'll say add app.post. It's going to be a post, right? At post, we'll create slash token, and we create a function called login here. Now we have to get the username and password here, right? Now to do that, FastAPI have a inbuilt form called OAuth2 password request form. So this is a inbuilt form that is inbuilt in FastAPI, and we can utilize that to get the username and password. So I'll use that and mention here as form data request form and add it as a dependency. So we'll say depends. Okay, now once we have utilized this, we can get the username password in this way. So we'll say username is form data dot username and password is form data dot password. Okay, let's verify this by using print username comma password. Let's go back to our document, refresh it, and here you can see the home endpoint with a log here. Okay, so I'll just click here. Now you have this form. So this is the form that is being utilized. So I'll just say for user2 @123. This will get authorized because we have not implemented any logic as of now, but you can see that it is authenticated, but this is the wrong mechanism. We have not implemented any logic in the backend. So let's go back, and here you can see we have user2 and user2 @123. That's the username and password is now properly been received. Now using this username and password, we now have to verify or validate that it indeed is a valid username and password. If it is, then we have to return a token to be sent to the client. So let's say we have to now authenticate, or we have now verify that this username and password indeed exist. Okay, so to do that, I will create another function called def authenticate user, to which I'll pass the username and password. Okay, now I'll get the user from user.objects.get username equals username. Okay, I'll first check whether the user is valid. Okay, now I'll just mention is as to JSON and as well as json.logs here. Now, if the user indeed exists, we have to verify whether the password that has been provided is correct. So we'll say password check equals, we will utilize this password context that we had created to hash this password, right? Now I'll use the same thing to verify whether the password is matching the hash. Okay, so I'll say password context dot verify. First we have to provide the plain text password that we have received. So here is the password, and then we have to pass the hashed password, which will come from user, right? This is stored here in MongoDB database. So I'll say user and password, because essentially this is a dictionary, so we are taking it like that. Okay, password. Now this will return either a true or a false. So I'll say return password check. So this means that if the user is also present in the system and if the password also verifies and the password also matches, then we'll return a true. Else we'll return false. Okay, that way we have implemented the authenticate user function. Now utilize this here. Now I'll say if authenticate user is have to pass the username and the password. So if it is true, so this authenticate user will either return a true or a false, right? So if true means if the user is authenticated, then I have to return a token. So I have to return it in this format itself. So I will say access token. Now for now I will pass the username. We'll get back to this. So I'll pass username as the token itself, and then I will also have to mention the token type. So I'll say token type should be bearer. Okay, now if it is not a valid user, I have to raise an exception. Right, now where do I get the exception? I'll import that from FastAPI. I'll say HTTP exception. So I'll say raise HTTP exception with a status code of 400, and as detail I'll mention incorrect username or password, generic message. Okay, so our login function or the slash token URL is ready. It will return a token in the form of the username as of now to the client. Now the client can come back here and pass that to the endpoint. So I will just change this to token, and so that we can see what token we have provided and token. Okay, let's go back to the document, pass a valid user, so user2 and user2 @123 authorize. Okay, so it has been authenticated. If I close this and if I try it out, execute it, you can see the token is user2, which is the username that we have provided. Okay, so that part is working. So the authentication mechanism is now ready. Now to verify that when we provide a wrong password, it does not get authenticated, let's just log out from here and enter user2 and I'm entering a wrong password, authorize. Here it's showing auth error, it's not getting authenticated. Let's try when we enter a wrong password as well. So we'll just say Jaren. All right, I'll authorize and it's showing an internal server error. Okay, let's go back. It's showing models does not exist, models. Oh, okay. So if we go back here, we have mentioned it, since there is no user, this is getting an error. We can use that in a try statement. I will mention this entire thing inside a try statement. And except will be models dot does not exist, so it will be, this is user model, the user dot does not exist, it will return false. I don't need to even provide this because otherwise it will anyhow raise an error. Yeah, so let's go back to the document, authorize. Now it's showing bad request. Okay, so that is working. Okay, so next let's create a better access token here. So right now we have only mentioned username, which is not proper, right? It is supposed to expire after a particular amount of time, but we have not done or not implemented any such kind of expiry or something like that in this case, right? So to implement that functionality, we will use something called as JSON web token, and the Python package that would help us do is called Python Jose. So we'll say pip3, let's install that first, pip3 install Python Jose with cryptography. So this is the package we'll be using to create a JSON web token. Now let's come back to the token URL. So here we'll create an access token, and we will create a function called create access token, which will take in two parameters. One is a dictionary called data that will have subject as the username. Okay, this is the first parameter. And secondly, we'll have a parameter called expires delta. Now this expired delta should be a time delta variable. So let's import that from datetime, import time delta. Then we can say expires delta is time delta of minutes is equal to 30. So here we are passing the expiry of the token. So here we are basically saying 30 minutes. Now let's create this function called create access token. This is a def create access token, will be a data with a dictionary as well as expires delta, which will be a time delta. Let's copy this data dictionary to a variable called to encode. So we use data.copy. Also create another variable called expire that will provide the expiry time of this token. So for that we have to import datetime from datetime and say datetime dot utc now plus expires delta. So this technically means expire after 30 minutes from the current time. Now we will update this to encode variable with exp expire. Now let's see what this to encode variable is all about now. Okay, let's run this. Say user2 at the rate 123 authorize. Let's go back here. Here you can see it's a dictionary with subject as user2 and expiry as 30 minutes from the current time. Okay, that's the to encode variable here. Now we have to use this to encode and come up with a token. Now to come up with a token, we will import from the package that we just created, import JWT. So we'll come back here and say encoded JWT is JWT dot encode. First parameter is to encode. We need two more parameters. One is called the secret key and the other is called the algorithm. Okay. Now, what is a secret key? Secret key is basically just a random string that we can provide. An algorithm is the algorithm using which the encoding will be done. So let's create a secret key. Now to create a secret key, we can just use something like open SSL random -x 32. Press enter. We will get a long string here, which we can use as the secret key. Copy paste and just mention secret key as this. It will be a string, and then the algorithm will be using HS256. Okay, so basically what it will do is this to encode variable will be encoded with this secret key using this algorithm. Okay, then finally we will return the encoded JWT. Now this encoded JWT with an expiry of 30 minutes will be passed here. Okay, so instead of username, we can now use access token. All right, let's run this and see. Let's go back to the document. Let's log out from here, enter the correct username and password, authorize. Oh, we have as typo error. It's algorithm. Okay, where was it? Algorithm. Okay, let's go back. Authorize. Yes, and let's execute this. Now we get a proper JWT token with an expiry of 30 minutes. Okay, now we can use this token for the next 30 minutes, and after which the FastAPI will again ask for the username and password. So that's how we can create a JWT and pass it to the client. Okay, so essentially that's it for the authentication part. We have seen how to hash the password. We have seen how to enforce authentication for a particular endpoint using this, and we have then created the token URL where we accept the username and password and provide an access token to the client, and that access token we have also implemented it to be a JWT token. So that's the basics of authentication. I hope all of you enjoyed this short FastAPI tutorial. If yes, please do like, share and subscribe. And also, for those who wants to learn more about MongoEngine, I have created another set of tutorial specifically for MongoEngine. So do go and check that out as well. Thank you.